Hi friends, I'm doing a tutorial series on character creation and rigging with Photoshop and After Effects. This is part 1, which is creating the character in Photoshop. Now, there are some differences when creating a character in Photoshop or Illustrator, mainly that Illustrator uses vectors, and what I'm doing today, since it's Photoshop, the images will be rasterized. You'll use either Illustrator or Photoshop depending on the needs of the animation and the look and feel you're going for with your designs. I chose Photoshop for this one because there are certain shading techniques that I wanted to use. There are different methods of rigging and animating in After Effects for characters. You can have sort of noodle or wavy arms where the entire limb, like the arm for example, is all on one layer, and then you rig it so that it's just got a nice curve as a joint, sort of like Adventure Time style limbs. Or you can have, which is what I'm doing now, is these more right angled joints. It's a sharper joint. But you can rig it either way. This is just the method I'm using for this one. Now I'm going to make the canvas quite big because since the graphics are not going to be vectorized, I won't be able to just turn on continuously rasterize in After Effects if they start getting pixelated, if I need to scale up the character. So I'm starting with it at a higher res and a larger scale so it's more versatile. If it was vector, you wouldn't need to do this. So I'm making it 2160 by 3840, which is double 1080 by 1920. Okay, here's our beautiful blank canvas. Let me just unlock this background layer and then add a new layer for the artwork to go onto. I'm going to start with the head. Make sure that you always name your layers, otherwise you're just going to get really confused. I'm going to use the ellipse tool so I can get a nice round shape to start off with. And I'm going to say yes to converting this into a path. Now I'm just going to edit this so that it's got a bit of a chin, and I'm going to change the color. New layer, and this is going to be the neck. So I'm going to go over to the shape tool again and use the rounded rectangle tool and drag out an approximate shape for the neck. I'm just going to use the move tool and move it into a position, drag it below the head, and I'm just going to use my arrow keys over here to nudge it over a bit, and then I'm going to change the color to match that of the head. I'm just going to rasterize this layer, and then I'm going to go and get an ellipse so that I can make a sort of a round ball joint at the top of the neck. The joints need to be round so that if any layers are pivoting and they go slightly over, you're not going to have any sort of edges jutting out. You're going to have these nice round curves, which won't be so much of an eyesore if you do by mistake have some peeking out. Now I'm going to go and duplicate this ellipse and drag it down so that we've got this cute little capsule shape for the neck, so that there's rounded ball joints at the top and the bottom of the neck. And then I'm going to rasterize these layers and merge them into one layer by going Control E. I'm going to zoom out just to take a look at it. I think it's starting to look good. I mean, there's not much there, but yeah. Okay. Pen tool. I'm going to give the neck a bit of a curve on the sides just so it's a little more aesthetic for me. So I'm going to use the pen tool to cut out these little pieces just so it's got a bit of a curve. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say make selection, make sure there's no feathering on it, and then I'm going to delete what is in that selection. Okay, there's just some slight corners over there that I want to clean up. Same thing again with the pen tool, just drawing around them and then making that selection and deleting it. Okay, zoom out, put the head back on. Looks good. Now we're going to do the body layer. For the body layer, I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool again. I want this body to be quite a straight up and down body. I don't want it to be too curvy. So I'm going to draw out the shape, just move it over into position. go over here to these corners and select them, drag them down a bit. Just want to round out where the shoulders are going to be a little. And now I'm going to go over here to the convert point tool so I can just convert those points and make them a little more rounded. Just going to adjust the body a bit more until I can get a shape that I really like. Okay, I'm going to delete these points here down at the bottom. This way I can have the corners and then just still have a slight bit of a curve on the actual body. I don't want the lines to be perfectly straight. This gives it just a little bit more of an organic feel. Convert point tool again, just to round them out very slightly. And now I'm going to select both of them and just move them down with the arrow key. Now I'm going to make a new layer, and that's going to be leg L, that's the left leg. When you're animating a character or creating a character to be animated or rigging it, it's best practices to label the limbs left and right according to the character's left and right, not your own left and right, which can get confusing sometimes, but it's a standard practice just so that people are not getting confused, so they're not thinking, oh, is this the character's left? Is it my left? Because when you're working quickly, it's quite important to have stuff labeled properly. I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool again for a nice long skinny leg. Change the color. And I'm going to create a ball joint here at the end for the knee. I see it's slightly too big over there, so just zoom in and neaten that up a little. Okay, I'm going to duplicate that ellipse for the next joint that I'll need. Turn it off to see where I'm working. Make sure that the ellipse is rasterized, and then I'm going to go Control E to merge those two layers for the thigh. And then I'm going to duplicate that, and that's going to be the calf. And I'm going to select that and I'm going to drag it down. If you hold shift, you can drag it straight down. And then I'm going to go transform and flip vertical, and that's just going to flip that upside down. Now I'm going to select both layers and turn down the opacity and then move up the calf layer so I can see how the ball joint aligns, and it needs to make a really nice, almost perfect as possible circle. Turn back the opacity. There's your legs so far. I'm going to select both of them and just drag them down so that they're sitting under the body layer. And now I'm just going to make the calf slightly shorter than the thigh, so I'm just going to get that box selection tool and select the bottom bit and just chop it off. Now I'm going to go and grab this ellipse that I previously duplicated. I turned it off, but now I'm going to use it, and I'm going to drag it down for the ankle ball joint. And now again you see we've got this elongated sort of capsule shape. So now if I just go and set the pivot point to where the knee would be once it was rigged, and rotate that just so you can see how the joints will work. So you can see now when it's round, it's going to have a nice little joint there, almost like a knee. Now if you didn't have that rounded ellipse over there for your ball joint, you would just have these sharp corners jutting out. Okay, I'm just going to select both of them and nudge them over a little bit so they're in a better position. Then I'm going to go back onto the body layer, and I'm going to adjust it again because I'm still not really happy with the shape of it. Okay, I think that's getting there at least. Okay, now I'm gonna start working on the sock and the shoe. So here's the top of the sock. She's gonna have those cute little white rolled down socks on. I'm gonna use the rounded rectangle, make the top and then duplicate it and do the bottom one and just scale it down slightly for a bit of variety in the silhouette. Okay, select both of them and rasterize the layers. And now I'm going to go to the calf layer, and if you click on the layer and go control click, then it will select the layer, and I'm just going to paint that bottom bit white for the sock, and then I'm going to go control E and merge that layer down onto the calf layer so the sock is part of the calf layer. And then I'm going to make another layer and make that the foot layer. And then I'm going to use the pen tool to draw out a foot. And just tweak the shape of it a little bit. It looked a little too big for her. Make sure it's flat on the ground. And then I'm going to right click and say fill path, and I'm going to pick for contents, I'm going to pick color, and then I'm going to choose the color almost black, not pitch black, and then say okay. So that'll fill that path. Delete that path so I can start another one. Then I'm going to draw the sole on. Right click, fill path, foreground color because it's white, so I can use that. Say okay, delete that path. And then I'm going to pick the pen tool, and when you say X, it's going to swap the foreground and background colors because I want the foreground color now to be black. And I'm going to draw a path here, then right click and say stroke path and stroke it with the brush that I chose. And that's going to make a line across that path. And then I'm going to delete that path, and then I'm going to go and draw in this toe part onto the shoe. Full path again, and this time with the background color because it's that white or off-white color. Delete the path. That's looking good. Proportions look fine to me. Now I'm going to draw on some laces, again with the path tool. Draw it on with the pen, stroke path, use the brush and just stroke it with white. Now you can see that the foot is straight across at the top over there. It doesn't have that joint, so when it rotates it's going to be a little bit of an issue with those sharp edges. As you can see here, it starts intersecting, and when it bends down you can see that round bit of the ankle kind of coming through. So I'm going to go and fix up that joint using the same method I used in the other ways with the path tool, and just cutting through into it to make it look like the top of a shoe more realistically. Now you can see when I rotated it actually looks worse because now it's got more of a gap as it rotates. So you can see where the ankle joint is and where the foot is. Now I'm going to go and create an ellipse there for the foot because there's already a round part on the ankle, but the foot needs one too. So I'm going to take that ellipse that I created and put it under the foot layer for now. Rasterize the layer. Drag the calf layer under those. I'm going to go Control E and merge the two. So you see the problem here is that there's still that part at the top of the shoe that's sticking out a bit from that ball joint that I created. And that's where those edges are. So now we need to just round those off a bit. Just always make sure you save your project. And now that we've rounded off those edges, your foot will work. So now we're going to go on and do the upper arm. Now you see I started making the left arm to correspond with the left leg, but it's behind her body. Using the rounded rectangle tool again. And I'm just going to move it up a bit there so that the top of her arm is not so long. The joint of the arm should kind of sit where a person's waist would be, that elbow part. I'm going to rename this to upper arm R and move it across so that it's the right arm that I'm actually working on, so that it's in front of her body and I can get that looking good first. Now I'm going to create the ball joint again. Zoom in, see it's slightly too big, scale it down so it fits. Duplicate that ellipse, hide it. Control E, merge those layers after you've rasterized the ellipse. Make another layer, and this is going to be the sleeve. Now I made an ellipse for the sleeve, made it the color of the shirt, and I'm going to edit it now so that it's more of a sleeve shape with the direct selection tool. Just dragging out those corners over there so it's more straight across at the bottom. Selecting both of them and moving them across so that they'll be in the right position on the body so I can see how they look. Now I'm still not happy with the body shape. I'm going to keep tweaking this until it looks good to me. I really don't like it when characters have a sort of hunchbacky vibe. Like their back looks really big because you're trying to have that space there for the arm joint to be. And sometimes it can be difficult getting the body to look nice in a nice shape and still not have any rig breaking or layers coming out where they shouldn't. Giving her a bit of a chest area here. Don't want anything too big, nothing ostentatious. And I'm just going to make that sleeve a little longer. Okay, I'm duplicating that upper arm layer and I'm going to make it the lower arm or the forearm. And again, the same way as with the leg, I'm just going to move that down. Turn on that ellipse layer that I had sitting there for just this occasion, move it into position. That's going to be the joint for the forearm. Rasterize the layer and merge the two. I'm going to move it up slightly so that the joints align and turn down the opacity so it looks round enough. See, I've got to move that up a little bit so it's more round. Otherwise, if it's not round like that, doesn't make that circular shape, then when your limb bends, it's going to look like the joint is collapsing. It's not going to look good. Rasterize that layer and merge the two. Okay, now let's make a new layer and have hand R. That is the hand layer for the right hand. Pen tool, I'm going to draw out the hand shape. Now this is a sort of a 3/4 view of the hand, not straight on and not completely to the side. I'm going to say full path and then pick color and then pick the color of the arm and fill the path with that color. I'm going to create a ball joint for it. Rasterize the layer, Control E to merge, turn down the opacity so we can check the joint. Looks good. Ugh, making hands is actually the worst. It's the part I hate the most because they're so fiddly with all their fingers and stuff. It's so much easier to create a character with like a sort of a mid hand where they've got like a thumb and then a bunch of fingers, or you know, like just 3 fingers. But it's so boring making hands and rigging them. But anyway, you know, we gotta do what we gotta do. There she is, giving me the bird because I insulted hands. Calm down, stay in your lane. I'm your creator. You should respect me. So I'm using the rounded rectangle tool here to create these fingers. I just made the middle one as sort of the basis for all the rest of the fingers. And then I'm just going to move it over to the right position, and I'm going to duplicate it for the rest of the fingers and just move them up and down and scale them appropriately. On the thumb, I'm going to turn that to a slight angle because that's how thumbs be. Yes, turn it into a path. Okay, we've got a hand-looking hand. I'm going to rasterize these bitches. Yes. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to go and name them. Name them properly. Otherwise you'll end up cursing yourself later down the line when you need to animate all these fingers and they're not named properly. Love yourself enough to name your layers. R. Okay, let's make sure we save. That's another self-care tip for your mental health. Make sure you save regularly. Let's grab these layers and move them in a little bit more. Now what I'm going to do is create a new shading layer for the head. So I'm making a whole new layer because when the face turns, that layer is going to need to move to make it look like the head is turning. So it needs to move independently of the actual head. So the shading is going to be on its whole own layer. Let me just fix the proportions a little bit here. The neck was a little fat, head was a little big. Okay, so now I am on this head shading layer. I'm gonna go over and select a soft brush, scale it up a bit, which you can do with the square brackets, and I'm gonna pick a darker color for the shading. So what I'm actually gonna do so that I can see how it's working is create a mask, which you do by selecting the head layer, control click on the head layer. That's gonna create a selection in the shape of the head. Then I'm gonna click on the head shading layer and then go down to this layer masking button and press that, and it's going to create a layer mask in the shape of the head. So this will give me some guidance about what it's actually going to look like with the shading on when I've got a mask on. But essentially in the end, I'm not going to import it with a mask because I will just create a matte layer in After Effects for that mask. I'm going to go disable layer mask here just so you can see what it looks like without that layer mask on. We don't want the shading to look too blotchy. It is a little blotchy here, but it shouldn't be too blotchy if it's going to be moving across. You don't want it to move over into those blotchy parts. So I'm just going to blur it a bit to smooth it slightly. Okay, there with the mask activated again, that's what it'll look like. So just so you can see how it'll work then when the head turns. Oh, whoops. I'm selecting the layer, but I just need to unlink the two so they don't both move together. So I'm selecting that layer and I'm just moving it to the side so you can see how this is going to work in After Effects. When the head turns, the shading is going to move with it. Okay, now I'm going to go to the neck layer and put some shading in on there. I'm going to do it directly onto the neck layer because this doesn't need to be as complicated as the head. Then I'm going to make a new layer, nose, caps lock, nose, and I'm going to make her nose. I'm going to use the paintbrush tool and I'm just going to paint a nose on here. I'm going to make sure shape dynamics on with pen pressure because that's how I like it. And I'm just going to paint a little nose line on there. Okay, let me make a new layer and do IL, the eye on the left hand side of her face. I'm going to do quite a big eye over here. I like big eyes, big round black eyes. It's kind of my trademark. So I'm going to go and change that to black. And then I'm just going to change the shape slightly so it's not perfectly round and it's got a bit of a cheek at the bottom here. I'm going to make another layer for the eye shine. It's that little white spot on the eye. Just gives them that little bit more life. So if you're doing normal eyes, which most people would be with, you know, an eyeball and an iris and a pupil, it's going to be the same sort of concept as what I'm doing here. So just the part that I've done black, the actual eyeball, you would make that white. And then the same way I've made the eye shine, you would make an iris. And then on top of that, you would make a pupil on its own layer. It's exactly the same concept, just, you know, a few more layers than what I have here. Then I'm going to duplicate that layer and I'm just going to flip it and move it over here. And then I'm going to rename it and move that up above the head shading layer because the head shading is interfering a little bit with the eye. Now the head I'm going to readjust. I don't like the shape now that she actually has facial features. It looks a bit too alien for me. And I'm just going to delete this layer mask over here for the head shading and just quickly make another one again with the new head shape. So that's just control click on the head layer, take that selection, click on the head shading layer and make the mask layer. Then save because I love myself. And let's make a new layer for the hair. Now this layer is going to be for the front part of the hair that goes, on the front of her face, which would be bangs or fringe or whatever you would have. And I'm going to take the pen tool and I'm going to draw it on. So I'm just drawing the shape of the hair on here. She's going to have little pieces of hair sticking out. It just makes a more attractive character in my opinion, and also it gives her a more distinctive silhouette, which is always a good thing to think about when you're doing character designs, is what the character's silhouette looks like, because it should look completely different to any other characters you have. So now I'm going to say full path here with foreground color, because that's the color I've got over there, the purple, and I'm going to drag the layer above the head shading layer. And now I'm going to add another path to the other side, which is the other side of the hair over here. This would be a sub path because it's a path on the same layer as the already existing path. So when I right click now and say, it's going to say full sub path, and then I just click and say yes, and it'll fill it with the same color. And now I'm just going to tweak the outline of the hair a little bit and just fill that in because it looked a little thin to me, and I'm going to delete the path. Okay, zooming out, it looks pretty good, except I just don't like that piece over there. I'm just going to tweak that a little over there, add another path and just fill that in. There we go, I prefer that much better, and delete that path. Cool, she's getting there. Now she has hair, she looks a lot better. Okay, now I'm going to make another layer, and this is going to be the hair back, which is obviously the back part of the hair, behind her head, behind her body. So I'm going to go and get the pen tool again, and I'm going to draw the back part of her hair on. Now I'm going to go with more straight looking hair because those are the that's the shape language that she has. It's quite straight lines. Okay, right click, full path. I'm going to pick a color which is going to be the same as the foreground color, just a darker tone of it. There we go. And now the layer, I just need to move it back behind all the other layers so that her hair is always behind everything. And delete that path. Now I see she's got a little baldy spot at the top over there, which is no good. Just going to go back to the hair front layer and fix that. Fill that in, right click, full path. Just going to eyedrop that color. Now it's the foreground color, say yes. Delete that path. Okay, I'm just going to move that head shading layer down and move that up, and I'm going to make another layer which is for the mouth. I'm actually just going to tweak the nose a little bit because it's a bit too blurred over there. I want the lines to be a little stronger. Okay, now the mouth. I'm going to draw the shape of the mouth just so I have a little more control over it. Cute little triangle mouth. Right click, full path, foreground color, yes. Another layer, that's going to be the lip. So I'm going to give her a little line under her mouth to indicate where her lip is, and I'm going to make sure that it's not a feathered brush and that it's got shape dynamics on and pen pressure. And then I'm just going to draw her lip on there. Her mouth is looking a little small when you pull out, so I'm going to go back onto the mouth layer and just make her mouth look a bit bigger so it's more distinctive when she's not zoomed in. That's better. Just delete that path. So what I'm going to do with the mouth actually is when I get into After Effects, I'm going to convert it into a path anyway, and I'll be animating that path to make the mouth expressions. Okay, now another layer, and I'm going to do eyebrow R, which is her right eyebrow. Her right, not your right or my right. Let's draw it on with the pen tool. I'm just going to tweak the shape a little bit here, and then full path. Pick the color, make it slightly darker than the hair. There we go. I'm just going to duplicate that layer for the left eyebrow. Then I'm going to go over to Edit, Transform, and Flip Horizontal. There we go, and I'm just going to drag it over there, holding Shift down so that it stays on the same level as the other eyebrow. I'm going to grab those two layers and just drag them down there so that they're behind the hair layer. Okay, now I'm going to go over back to the head shading layer and make sure I've got a soft brush on, and I'm just going to do some shading underneath the hair for the shadow that the hair would cast onto the face. That just gives it a little more depth. So I'm just lightly brushing that on there. When the head turns and that head shading layer is going to move, the hair front is going to move with it, because as your head turns, your hair also moves. Okay, let's go to the neck layer, and I'm just going to add a little more depth over there under her chin. Now she needs a little more color in her face, so I'm going to give her some cheeks. So I'm going to make a new layer here with a soft brush, color picking the shirt because it's a nice pink, and I'm just going to gently brush some blush onto her cheeks there. Just drag that down because that layer was over the eye layers. There we go. Looking cute. Now I'm just going to go to her lip and also give that some pink. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a highlight too. I'm going to go to the nose and give that a little bit of a cute highlight. And blur that a little. Don't want it to look too sharp. And then I'm just adding a little bit of pink just to the tip of her nose. Okay, now I'm just selecting the hair back layer, control click on the layer, and then I'm going to go and get a bit of a darker purple. And just near the top where her head is and where her neck is, I'm just going to make that a bit darker. Now I'm just going to go and grab the dodge tool over there and just dodge the edges of her hair where light would kind of be shining through. Bit of a rim light sort of effect. And then to the hair front layer and do the same thing on the top of the head where light would be shining down on her, and just a bit around to frame her face, and then some just subtle highlights. Now I'm going to select the burn tool and just put a bit of shading there at the front of her face too, and there where her roots of her hair would be. Now I'm going to do something on the shirt. I'm going to go and select the body layer, color pick that, make it a little darker, and I'm just going to do some shading on the shirt then. There we go. Just so she's not so flat looking. Because I'm not using vectors here, I don't really want like a vector effect in the artwork. I specifically wanted to do some of the shading on it, which is why I didn't use Illustrator for this. So now I'm going to add some shading to the arms as well, color pick them and choose a darker color, and just gently brush some shading onto them. You need to be careful now when you get to the joints, because when they bend, then you're going to see the differences in the colors. So it's better to try and do shading in the sort of middle of the limbs and try to avoid too much color differentiation around the joints, which is why I'm now going to color pick that lighter purple again and just gently brush over there at the joints, so that when the joints bend, you're not going to get these weird lines kind of going through the arm. Just gonna add a little more shading there to the top of the arm. And then to the forearm. And then I'm going to do some shading onto the hand. Same concept here, you can kind of see over there. Need to avoid the joints, otherwise you can see that round part, and then you have to be very careful to try and match the shading exactly. So it's really easier just to color pick the lighter color, the base color of the limb, and just shade that onto where the joints are, so the dark shadow doesn't interfere with it as much. Now I'm just going around sort of the ends of each finger and the sides, again not near the joint. Now I'm just going to turn down the opacity on the hand and check where the thumb joint is. That looks okay. I just don't want it sticking out when the thumb rotates. Okay, now I'm still not happy with how sort of her back looks quite big still, so I'm going to go and just tidy that up a little bit. I'm going to turn off the arm layers here so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to make that selection and then delete. And now I'm going to select all these layers for the arm and the hand and the fingers and just move them over a little because I just want to change the position a bit. And now I see there's a bit of an edge over there, so I'm going to chop that off. And now the same thing here for this part of her chest. Duplicating this arm, so this is for the other arm that's going to go behind her body, which is her left arm. And I'm going to go and rename all of these R copies to say L. And I'm going to make them all slightly darker with the brightness and contrast. I'm going to go to -12, then just copy that, Control C, and say OK. And I'm going to do the same amount to brightness and contrast to all of them, which is -12. So I'm just going to go into the value for each one and paste the -12 that I copied from the first one. So that difference in the brightness is just to show that it is the arm behind her, so it's slightly darker. This means when you're animating and the arm's cross or intersect, then you're not going to get this sort of visual noise of two of the exact same looking things crossing each other. I'm just moving the hair back layer to make sure it's behind that arm too. Now I'm going to do the shading onto this leg, and once I've done the shading on the leg, then I'm going to duplicate it to make the other leg, just so that I don't have to go and redo the shading on that one as well. Do some shading on the sock. And then on the foot. So let me select all of these and duplicate them, and that'll obviously then become the right leg. If you notice, I'm putting it slightly lower than the other on the floor, because when you're standing at an angle like that, your feet are not both on the same level from the viewer's side. I'm just adding some differentiation to the legs on her jeans, little scuffs and imperfections. Just gives it a little more character. Okay, I'm still not totally happy with the body. Let me just go fix this up a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to sort out how her eyes are going to blink. So there's a few different ways of doing facial expressions and eyes and stuff like that. You can have different artwork layers for them that you cut between, or what I'm doing now is basically having a closed eye behind her existing eye, and then I'm going to have her eyes be shape layers in After Effects, so I'm not going to cut between art layers. So I'm going to select, okay, let me turn off the eye shine layer, and then I'm going to go and duplicate this IL layer and call it eye back. It's going to be the back part of the eye, so when her eye blinks or closes or whatever, you'll see that part. I'm going to do the same with the right eye. Turn off the main eye, and now I've just got those eye backs. So I'm just going to select the two eye back layers, and I'm going to rasterize them. And I'm going to select eye back L and control click on it so that it selects the layer, and then I'm going to fill it in with a color that's slightly darker than the skin color. And the same thing with the other eye. So I'm just going to go up to filter and blur and add a Gaussian blur. And I'm going to get a slightly brighter color. Whoops. Make sure it's a soft brush. Shape dynamics, pen pressure. I'm just going to turn down the opacity a little bit. And then I'm just going to do sort of a shine or a highlight down them. So kind of it looks like when your eyelids are closed and there's a bit of that shine on it. And then I'm I'm going to change the brush color to black. Make sure that I got pen pressure on and it's a hard edged brush, and I'm going to brush on that line for the closed eyes. There we go, turn the eyes back on over that. Looks fine. There's just a tiny piece over there I'm going to blur out of that eyelash. There we go. Looking good. Now I need something on the shirt. The shirt's looking a little plain. So I'm going to get the ellipse selection and I'm going to make it a slightly lighter pink than the shirt. And I'm just going to make a new layer, and then I'm going to create an ellipse on there. Turn up the opacity, just color that in. I'm going to move it into position, a better spot. There we go. And I'm just going to put some text in there. No. Decrease the size of the text because it was obviously too big. Just going to squish it a little. Change the color so it's not as in your face, it blends in a little better with the shirt. And I'm just going to squash it because she's turned slightly at an angle anyway, so it's better for it to look slightly squashed from that perspective. And then I'm going to go transform and warp, and I'm going to warp it the way it would be warped if it was a logo on a girl's t-shirt. It wouldn't be just totally flat and straight. Just going to do the warp again and tweak it slightly. And I'm just going to turn down the opacity a little. That's better. You don't want it to be too in your face. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a cheeky little nose ring to her because that's cute. Oops, no, slightly lower. There we go. Just gonna dodge it a little there for the shine. There we go. I think that's nice. And I'm going to delete the layer mask on the head because, like I mentioned before, I'm not going to be actually using the layer mask in After Effects. I'm going to create my own matte. And I'm going to delete that solid background because we just don't need it. And why bloat your file if you don't need the stuff that's in it? So now the hair is going to be on its own layer and it's going to move when the head turns to give it a sort of a more 3D parallax effect. So when it moves, you'll see a bit of a scalp peeks out and it looks strange and baldy and not nice. So we're going to have to fix that up. So I'm going to actually paint the color of her hair onto that part of her head so that if her hair does go off like that, then you're not going to get that very pale scalp color poking through. Let's just turn those layers back on and then check what it's going to look like. Oh, you see, no, it's still going to have some there. You just need to test throughout. It's the worst when you've started rigging something and then you realize there's an issue and you have to fix something in the artwork. Sometimes it can make the rig freak out, so it's better just to be as sure as possible that everything you could possibly need done is done before you start rigging. Okay. That looks like it's gonna work. I'm just gonna do a little more over here on the edge. Save. And that is it. That is our girl, Lucy. She's looking good. She's looking confident. I think she's ready to take on the next part of the series. She's ready to get rigged. And I hope you guys are ready to rig your character that you made in After Effects using DUIK or DUIK, which is a free plugin. So don't worry, I didn't take you all this way just to tell you you needed to buy a plugin. I'm not about that life. I don't do that to people. So you'll just need to install DUIK. I can totally show you how in the next video, and get ready to learn how to rig a character in After Effects and bring them to life. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and if you want to find out what happens next in the series so that you can rig your character, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like so that I can have some motivation for all this work I'm putting into it. Thanks for watching. Love ya. Bye.